February 12, 1942, North Atlantic, 200 miles east of Nova Scotia. The wind screamed across the black water as SS Francis E. Peabody, a Liberty ship only 4 weeks into service, bucked under the weight of the waves. The night sky was moonless, just jagged clouds and the distant flicker of lightning on the horizon. The crew moved like ghosts across the deck, voices muffled by wool scarves and the thrum of the engines below. Seaman First Class Arthur Malloy clutched the railing with numb fingers, scanning the darkness. Every crest of a wave looked like a periscope. Every hiss of spray sounded like a torpedo's wake. Convoys were supposed to protect them, but tonight their escort destroyer had vanished into the storm. The radio crackled with interference and the signal lamp on the bridge glowed behind sheets of rain. Inside the bridge, Captain Ernest Whitaker stood hunched over a map, a red pencil tapping the plotted course. "Keep speed at 8 knots, he muttered to his first mate, eyes never leaving the glass. "If they're out there, we're already in their sights." At that very moment, 5 miles away and beneath the surface, Captain Lieutenant Dieter Hagen watched through the periscope of U-558. The silhouette of the Liberty ship appeared between rolls of fog and spray, slow, tall, heavy with cargo. Exactly what Berlin wanted them to kill. His radio man whispered confirmation of the target's speed. Hagen didn't smile. He simply gave the order. Back aboard Francis E. Peabody, Malloy saw it just for a heartbeat. A white streak racing low across the water. "Torpedo wake! Starboard side!" he yelled, voice cracking through the wind. The impact struck with a deep metallic scream like a cathedral bell being torn in half. Steel plates twisted. The deck lurched. Crates of rations and munitions broke free and slid across the hold. Men stumbled, alarms blared, and the Atlantic swallowed the light from the blast. Within 12 minutes, the Peabody was gone, another entry in a growing list. The ocean floor was filling with American ships faster than anyone could build them. Back in Washington, in the offices of the U.S. Maritime Commission, grim numbers covered the war room boards. In January alone, U-boats had sunk over 500,000 tons of Allied shipping. One officer, eyes hollow from lack of sleep, muttered what everyone feared. "We can't win a war if we can't move it." But 1,000 miles away, in a smoggy California shipyard lit by floodlights and sparks, a civilian with no shipbuilding pedigree was about to defy logic, tradition, and every ruling voice in Washington. His name was Henry J. Kaiser, and almost everyone in the industry thought he was insane. April 3, 1942, Richmond, California. Kaiser Shipyard's Yard Number 1. Sparks bloomed in the night like white-hot fireflies as welding torches hissed across steel plates the size of houses. The ground vibrated with the thump of overhead cranes, swinging prefabricated sections into place. The yard didn't sleep. It pulsed. Henry J. Kaiser, broad-faced, hat in hand, coat flapping in the coastal wind, strode along a catwalk overlooking the berths. He wasn't a shipbuilder. He wasn't Navy. He wasn't even trained in engineering. He'd built roads, dams, and hospitals. Steel ships? That was supposed to be someone else's problem. But America's shipyards were failing, and Henry Kaiser hated failing. Beside him, Commander Charles Chick Hayes of the U.S. Maritime Commission tried to keep pace. His polished shoes were already coated in dust and slag. "Mr. Kaiser," he shouted over the machinery, "you can't weld ships together. Riveting is tested, proven. Hell, it's how the Great White Fleet was built." Kaiser didn't slow down. "Riveting takes too long," he called back. "We build piece by piece, hull by hull, week by endless week, while U-boats punch holes in them faster than we can deliver." Hayes pointed to the skeleton of a Liberty ship under construction. The keel sat like the spine of a beached whale. "Rivets hold. Welding cracks under strain. The Navy won't risk it." Kaiser stopped at the edge of the berth and turned to him. The floodlights threw sharp lines across his face. "You're thinking about how ships were built," he said quietly. "I'm thinking about how fast we need them built." Below them, hundreds of workers, men and women, veterans and farmhands, machinists and housewives, moved like an army with torches. Teams hammered, aligned, and fused pre-made hull sections that had been fabricated off-site, delivered by rail, and stacked in giant cradles before being lowered by crane. Factory-style shipbuilding. Assembly lines for the sea. A foreman jogged up the catwalk, helmet smeared with soot. "Mr. Kaiser, Section C is ready to connect. We'll have the midship welded by morning." Hayes blinked. "Section C? You're building the ship in parts? Kaiser clapped the rail with his glove. Modular construction. We assemble whole sections separately, then weld them together. Like a suit of armor, just faster. Hayes hesitated. Washington thinks you're gambling with national assets. Kaiser smiled for the first time all night. Tell Washington this: if the U-boats are going to sink ships, we'll build them faster than they can reload. He wasn't bluffing. In less than 6 months, his yards had gone from drawing board to launching their first welded Liberty ship. And the methods were getting faster every week. As midnight neared, a woman in coveralls guided a welding torch along a seam taller than she was, visor down, hand steady. Beside her, a young man from Oklahoma hauled cables and shouted measurements. The old world said neither of them belonged in a shipyard. Kaiser didn't care. He needed hands. He needed speed, he needed ships, and he was about to prove every admiral, engineer, and shipwright wrong. One welded hull at a time. May 17, 1942. U.S. Maritime Commission Headquarters. Washington, D.C.A. long oak table separated tradition from revolution. On one side sat Navy architects and representatives from Bethlehem Steel and Newport News Shipbuilding, men who had built warships since Theodore Roosevelt was in uniform. On the other sat Henry Kaiser, and a handful of his engineers dressed in plain suits still dusted with graphite. An admiral with a chest full of ribbons leaned forward, fingers pressed together. "Mr. Kaiser," he said, voice cool and measured, "you're proposing that we trust untested welds, performed by unskilled labor, to hold ocean-going vessels under torpedo attack?" Kaiser met his stare without blinking. "I'm proposing we build ships faster than they can be sunk, and welding makes that possible." A naval engineer slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of fractured test plates, jagged seams, and early weld failures. "Riveting," he said, tapping the folder, "has never failed us." Kaiser didn't touch the photos. "Riveting requires 2 men per rivet, one inside, one outside, and teams to heat and pass the steel pins. That's thousands of rivets per hull. Weeks of labor before the ship even touches water." He leaned forward. "Welding needs 1 person and a torch. No rivet stock. No hole drilling. No wasted time." A representative from the Philadelphia Navy Yard muttered, "And no guarantees." Kaiser opened a slim folder of his own. Inside were charts. Launch times. Labor hour costs. Output rates per hull. "Gentlemen," he said, sliding it to the center. "Last month, my yard laid the keel and launched a Liberty in 24 days. Your fastest is still over 100. Silence. Somewhere in the hallway, a typewriter clacked like distant gunfire. One commissioner cleared his throat. "Even if your welds hold, you don't have enough skilled labor. We don't have thousands of trained marine welders ready to go." Kaiser's expression didn't change. "Then we'll train them. From scratch," the admiral scoffed. "You can't train ship welders in weeks." Kaiser sat back. "Watch me. June the 2nd, 1942. Richmond Shipyard, No. 2. The training tent stretched like circus pavilions along the waterfront. Inside, sparks rained from rows of practice plates while instructors barked instructions over the electrical buzz. Former waitresses, taxi drivers, teachers, farmers, circus hands. Anyone with strong nerves and steady hands was fitted for a mask and gloves. Maria Cortez, once a hairdresser from Fresno, now hunched over a plate of half-inch steel, guiding a weld bead with quiet precision. At the next table, Leonard Briggs, a former bartender from Chicago, squinted through his visor and tried to keep a straight line. A foreman walked the aisle and checked their seams with a chipped ruler. "You pass this test," he said. "You're welding real hulls next week." By the end of summer, Kaiser had trained more welders than any shipyard in history. Traditionalists called it reckless. Historians would later call it the turning point. Above the noise of grinders and cranes, Kaiser looked out across the berths. Hull sections, each weighing tens of tons, were stacked and numbered like warehouse inventory, waiting to be stitched into ships. The U-boats were winning the tonnage war in the Atlantic. August 14th, 1942, just started working against them. Richmond Shipyard, No. 3, California. Floodlights turned night into noon across the bay. The clang of steel, the scream of cranes, and the pop and hiss of 1,000 torches blended into an industrial symphony. Towering gantries swung prefabricated hull modules, each the size of a house, into position with military precision. A hull didn't rise from a keel upward anymore. It arrived in pieces: bow, stern, deckhouses, midsections, stacked and staged like an enormous metal puzzle. Once, shipwrights had spent months shaping every inch by hand. Now dozens of teams worked in parallel. At Berth 5, Hull 418, later named SS Joseph N. Teal, was taking shape faster than anyone outside Kaiser's yards believed possible. The midship section arrived by rail just after dawn, a rectangular block of steel already complete with bulkheads and pipe fittings. Workers in grease-streaked coveralls guided it onto rollers, aligning it against the stern module by eye and chalk marks. "You're 2 inches left, bring it in slow," yelled Foreman Eddie Delgado, his voice hoarse from 3 shifts without rest. His helmet brim was scorched from sparks and his clipboard was smeared with chalk and fingerprints. Overhead, a whistle blew. Section weld teams surged forward. Dozens of men and women clamped steel plates into place, then struck arcs that lit the air white. The seams glowed orange, then dulled as water hoses blasted away heat. Inspectors followed with gauges and mallets, tapping every joint. Nearby, a Navy observer shook his head in disbelief. "You're telling me that section was built off-site, and it just fits?" Delgado didn't look up. "We build them to match. No guesswork. No do-overs. Next question?" The observer scanned his clipboard. "How many hours since keel laying?" 3 days. Delgado grinned without humor. "We'll be in the water inside 10. A shrill blast of steam cut through the air, another launch signal. Across the yard, workers paused to watch as SS John W. Brown slid down the greased ways, prow knifing the bay with a plume of water. Over 1,000 shipyard workers cheered like spectators at a boxing match. In the launch control shack, a journalist from the San Francisco Chronicle wiped sweat from his brow. "Mr. Kaiser," he asked, "do you think you can really outbuild the U-boats?" Kaiser stood with hands clasped behind his back, eyes on the waterline where the new ship drifted free. "We don't need to outbuild every U-boat," he said evenly. "Just their torpedoes." He wasn't exaggerating. Before Kaiser, a cargo ship took nearly a year to complete. Now his yards were averaging 45 days, and still speeding up, and one project was about to prove just how far he could push it. September 1942. Rumors began to spread. One ship was being built not in weeks, but in days. Mechanics shook their heads. Riveters scoffed. Admirals placed bets. The Germans had no idea what was coming. November 8, 1942. Richmond Shipyard No. 2. Berth 3 floodlights burned through coastal fog as welders, riggers, crane operators, and inspectors moved with the rhythm of a prize fight. A banner made from scrap canvas hung over the berth. SS Robert E. Peary, record or bust. The Maritime Commission wanted proof that mass welding and modular assembly could shatter logistics limits. Kaiser accepted the challenge without flinching. The clock started the moment the keel plates were laid. Hour 1. Flat cars arrived with prefabricated hull panels, each stenciled and numbered. Cranes lifted them with the delicacy of surgeons. Hour 7. The midship module was already upright, held in place by temporary braces and a swarm of welders stitching seams like tailors on steel. Foreman Delgado shouted over the roar of the yard, "Check your lines twice, weld once. If it don't fit, make it fit." Hour 14. The bow section arrived by rail from the auxiliary yard and was swung into place. Torch crews melted the edges into glowing seams, the air thick with ozone and grit. A team of inspectors moved in as soon as the welds cooled, tapping each joint with hammers and taking notes faster than stenographers. Hour 22. The stern module locked in. The propeller shaft housings and rudder fittings were already installed, pre-assembled days earlier. Someone remarked that traditional yards hadn't even finished riveting frames by this point. Workers rotated in shifts barely long enough to gulp coffee and wipe the soot from their faces. Women in heavy gloves ran cable. Teenagers fresh from farm towns hauled gas canisters. Men who'd never seen the ocean fused steel to steel with the calm of veterans. Hour 60. Deckhouses were craned aboard. Pipe fitters and electricians followed behind them with rolls of wire, tool belts clanking against the hull. A welder named Nancy Torch Donnelly paused only long enough to cough into her sleeve before reigniting her torch. "You can either breathe or build," she muttered. She chose the latter. Hour 96. The ship had bulkheads, holds, stacks, rails, and a bridge. Teams scrambled across scaffolding like ants with flame and hammer. News crews arrived, cameras flashing under tarps. A Life magazine reporter scribbled madly in the margins of his notepad. "They're not building a ship," he whispered to his photographer. "They're assembling Thunder, hour 103. The final welds were quenched." Inspectors signed the last of the paperwork. Painters slapped the name across the bow in block letters. SS Robert E. Peary, hour 104.5. The whistle screamed, with crowds of workers lining the rails, flags waving and klaxons howling through the mist. The ship slid down the greased ways into the bay. Water surged over the prow as it settled afloat. Engines not yet cold from testing. Total time from keel laying to launch, 4 days. 15 hours, 26 minutes. One German admiral, upon hearing the report days later, assumed it was a mistranslation. It wasn't. Henry Kaiser stood at the viewing platform, coat flecked with grind dust. He didn't raise his arms or shout. He simply said to the reporter beside him, "Now we know what fast enough looks like." And from that moment, the tonnage war in the Atlantic began to tilt. January 1943. Berlin. Kriegsmarine High Command. A gray map table stretched across the war room floor, black pins marking each sunk Allied vessel. Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat arm, stood silent as an adjutant read the latest tallies. "Allied losses remain high, Herr Großadmiral," the officer said, voice low. "But replacement tonnage, it has increased faster than expected. American shipyards are producing more hulls than we estimated." Dönitz narrowed his eyes. "How many per month?" "Over 100 Liberty ships, sir." "And the sinkings?" 30 to 40, Herr Großadmiral. Then Dönitz spoke a phrase that no one in the room expected to hear. "They are replacing ships faster than we can destroy them." Across the ocean, the proof was everywhere. February 1943, Mid-Atlantic, convoy HX-223, the SS John W. Brown, a welded Liberty ship from a Kaiser yard, charged through rough seas under the protection of destroyers and corvettes. Its decks were stacked with jeeps, rations, fuel drums, and artillery pieces, cargo that would feed and arm thousands. In the galley, steam clanged against tin trays as the cook poured coffee for the night watch. Above deck, the ship's hull groaned but held firm as freezing spray shattered against the bow. Every sailor aboard knew the stories, steel plates cracking, seams splitting, but the welds didn't fail. Not this time. Not like the skeptics said they would. A lookout on the bridge scanned the waves and muttered, "They can hit us, but they can't sink us all." Hundreds of miles away, another convoy steamed westward, carrying raw materials back to America. For every Liberty ship lost, 2 more took its place. Soon 3, then 5. March 1943, Richmond, California. The yards were now cities of movement and fire. Shift changes looked like parades. Rail lines delivered pre-cut plates and prefabricated sections by the mile. Welding crews moved faster, cleaner, tighter. Engineers no longer argued whether modular construction worked. They argued how to shave hours off their own records. Henry Kaiser walked the length of berth 2 as another completed hull prepared for launch. A young reporter jogged alongside him, notebook flapping. "Mr. Kaiser," he asked, "what do you say to those who claimed this couldn't be done?" Kaiser paused and looked out across the half-lit yard where cranes swung like skeletons and the bay glimmered with reflected sparks. "I never cared what they said," he replied quietly. "I cared what we could build." April 1943, North Atlantic. For the first time since the war began, Allied merchant tonnage was increasing, not shrinking. Supplies flowed into Britain. Tanks and trucks crossed into North Africa. Grain, fuel, and steel reached ports untouched by blockade. The Liberty ships were no longer a gamble. They were the backbone of survival. The U-boat captains called them the plague ships. And the man who had never built a ship before, the war had just outpaced the submarine wolf packs of the Atlantic. From the welding torch to the ocean lanes, Henry Kaiser's crazy idea had redrawn the map of possibility. In the shadow of every Liberty ship's smokestack was the same unspoken truth. Innovation didn't just build ships, it bought time. And in World War II, time was victory.